Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in business and in life and simplify them. And okay, so here's my question for you. You're chugging along, you're running your business, things are moving fine and dandy, and then, you take a break and you're like, oh, I'm just going to flip through Instagram really quick. And you flip through and you start to see some of your competitors or colleagues doing amazing, awesome things. Maybe they just won a client and now that they're doing work with them in Cancun. Maybe they have won a really big award that you've always aspired to win. Maybe they have gotten a piece of press or media and you're like, dang, why not me? Well, I want to talk about that. That is all about the comparison trap. And so let's simplify how to not get yourself into that trap and also how to thrive and keep your blinders on. My special guest today is Anna Dunleavy, and she is an NLP mindset coach for women in business, and she's also a wedding photographer. She took her business full-time 2 years ago and has been organizing monthly meetups for creative women in Nottingham ever since. She's also the host of the Fearless Hustle Collective podcast, talking about the ups and downs of running your own business. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast today, Anna Dunleavy. Hey, Anna.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh my goodness. So what I just described happens literally every day to probably every single listener. Everybody's nodding their head. Yes. Happened to you too, right? What's your experience with the comparison trap?
Yeah, I think it started right from kind of the beginning of setting up my business. And I think particularly when you're growing in something, I think it's very easy to look at what others are doing, whether that's under the, disguise of just seeking inspiration, which we all do, and it's something that we all need to do at certain times in our work. However, I think it's very easy to fall into that comparison, and I think I find personally Instagram the worst for it, because you end up, like you say, kind of just scrolling through and 2 hours go by and you're kind of down that rabbit hole and you're not entirely sure, what happened. And I think when we get into that zone of kind of just looking through just this huge amount of information and amount of content, I think we actually don't even realize that it's triggering that comparison a lot of the time. And so what used to happen for me was I would do the scroll, or perhaps, look at other people's work. And then, a couple of hours later, I would be wondering why my mood suddenly just plummeted and I was kind of feeling all kinds of rubbish. And I couldn't really understand where it was coming from until, I started kind of taking a little bit of notice on what is actually causing this. And it's something that I've definitely struggled with, and something that I'm a lot more aware of now.
Well, and I think that's it. I think if you look at, zoom out and look at what Instagram is as a whole. I use it for my business. I don't have a personal account. I just have a business account. And what it does is it is an app that is specifically built and designed to keep your eyeballs on there as long as possible so that they can sell advertising dollars and make money, right? So that's the inherent part of this thing that now is part of our daily lives if you are on social media and you're a small business owner, right? And it's also, the premise is built upon pretty pictures and videos. That's exactly what it is, right? If it wasn't pretty pictures that are super filtered and it wasn't engaging videos, people's eyeballs wouldn't stay on it. So you're absolutely right. When you use Instagram as I'll just do this for 5 minutes between task 1 and task 2, I think it is doing a detriment to all of our brains. And we're all starting to slowly awaken to that truth, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think what I'm noticing more and more is that actually people are starting to take kind of social media detoxes as a result of just feeling this kind of overwhelm. And it's not just for comparison, but just generally this kind of overwhelm of information that we're constantly bombarded with.
Yeah.
And it can be just really overwhelming.
Yeah. And I think you hit on it totally. In those first 0 to 4 years of starting a business where you don't know what you don't know. So you're like, oh, well, if I could just go and see what Anna's doing over there. And then I'm like, oh, okay, cool. She's got some graphics and she's got some things. And oh man, she won this award recently. Like then that's where it goes from a healthy place of like, oh, I'm just looking for inspiration to an unhealthy place of like, oh my God, I'm a wreck. What am I doing? I'm completely don't know what I'm, I should quit now and just stop. That leads into imposter syndrome. How would you define imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome is a funny one. I think it comes up for most women actually I speak to, but it's this inability to claim yourself as an expert, inability to accept your successes as for what they are. We often, and particularly kind of as women, I think we have a tendency to look for explanations outside of our own skills, if that makes sense. So we might put things down to luck or external factors such as working with someone else or putting our achievements down to someone else entirely. And so it's this inability to actually own our expertise and our achievements, and this feeling of being a fraud in whatever it is that you do. So yeah, I certainly see it kind of popping up as in the one-to-one coaching that I do. It's definitely something that comes up a lot.
So how do you tackle it yourself? And then how do you help your clients tackle it when it does pop up?
Well, I think one of the kind of things we need to be aware of and actually kind of just make an effort to do is to bring kind of awareness to what is actually happening.
Yeah.
And why are we struggling to take ownership of those achievements and that expertise? What is actually kind of happening? Is it tied to your idea of what a successful person looks like?
Yeah.
And perhaps that's what's stopping you from actually fully owning it. Is it the fact that you don't think you are successful because you're not earning X amount of money? A lot of the time that's kind of that feeds into it. So really kind of trying to understand where those feelings are coming from, and also actually doing something as simple as perhaps writing a list of all of your achievements and trying to be really objective about the fact that actually, yeah, you did all of that work and you did get that recognition, for example, whether that's awards or, even as far as grades at school. Something that I remember happened to me when I was studying for my GCSEs and I got my results. I genuinely believed that someone had kind of helped me to get the grades that I did, in the sense that, perhaps, I don't know, a teacher had put in a good word somewhere. It just didn't make sense to me.
Right. Yeah.
Which is crazy because obviously nobody would do that. Nobody would put their career at risk for my benefit.
Yeah.
So, and when I think about it, I studied, I did the work. So therefore my results were what they were. But at the time I couldn't, it just seemed I couldn't own those achievements.
And, again, I'm sure there's somebody somewhere that is nodding their head. Yes. Like, yep, I've been there. I've been there today. I've been there this week. I've felt that, and it's hard. And I think you're right. I think awareness is the first step to even just like, again, be able to zoom out from your kind of situation and go, oh, that's what's going on with that character right there. So talk to me about how, if we don't bring awareness to the situation, we just sort of chug along as is and just keep plugging along. What's the consequence? What do you see happening?
Well, one of the things that I notice, and I know kind of I can be guilty of myself sometimes, is not pausing to celebrate the achievements that we have, whether that's just, our first month in the business or getting our first paid client. It kind of seems small, but actually it's not. And, if you were to compare it to you a year ago when you didn't have any clients and this was just a dream, it's a big deal.
It is a huge deal.
Exactly. But we don't pause to actually appreciate it in any way. And so, like you say, we chug along, we continue going. And I think what can happen is we don't give ourselves that space to kind of process what's happening and, look at the progress we've made. And I think that can also have an impact on how we perhaps show up in our business.
Yeah.
And obviously that has a knock-on effect on potentially not making the time to, plan for what's coming and what's ahead, because we've just not taking any stock of what's happened.
So can I ask you a hard question, though? Because, it's so interesting to me. I know you from the local Nottingham network and, through Blue Stocking Society and all of that, right? I've lived here in the UK for a little bit over 5.5 years now, from Texas originally. My hard question is this. I feel like being an expat here, there's a British cultural element to this wanting to be modest or not really talk about my celebrations, my achievements in an outward way. Whereas as an American, this is like, of course I'm going to tell the world, like, I'm really proud of this. Like, hey, I won this award, or hey, I'm doing this thing. Like, it's like from day one, it doesn't even resonate in my head of like, of course I'm going to tell the world because I worked hard for this and I want to tell people. What do you think there's a Britishness that holds people back? Well, assuming that you're British, to not want to outwardly talk about your achievements?
Yeah, so, well, funnily enough, I wasn't born in England, so I'm not British by passport.
Yeah.
I was born in Poland and I actually moved to the UK when I was 13.
Wow.
So it was quite a transition. But I think the culture in Poland when it comes to this kind of stuff is actually very similar.
Yeah.
And so you are taught from a very early age not to boast, not to shout about your achievements, and it's kind of seen as maybe a little bit arrogant. And it's such an interesting kind of approach, isn't it? Because I really admire the way that the Americans are able to just be like, hey, I've done this thing.
Yeah.
And it was great. And we're much more reserved in that way, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, from my point of view, when I do shout from the rooftops about something big that has happened with the Simplifiers, yeah, I'm always aware of like it not being too like boastful, but just being like, wow, and my team and I did this thing, and to celebrate that in that kind of way. So for me, in my head, I don't know. I think it's a given. If I have set a goal and I achieve the goal, or say I win a speaking gig at a place that I'm really proud of, I am gonna talk about it on all social media accounts. I'm gonna blast it to the email list. So people know where I am and what I'm up to.
Yeah. Well, going back to the imposter syndrome, I think if you kind of suffer with that, I think you struggle to kind of tell the world about the things that you're doing, because if you're not internally kind of acknowledging those achievements, I think it's then hard to say, oh, hey, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I think it's it's a really interesting dynamic. I think it probably takes baby steps to come out of it and to kind of unlearn those behaviors, I guess.
Yeah. Well, so what advice would you give that person then?
I think I would probably start small and potentially, if it is about sharing achievements, maybe just share them with your close family and friends first. Mm-hmm. And I think the feedback that we're going to get, which, 99% of the time is probably going to be really positive, it will give us that boost and that kind of that evidence that actually it's okay to share our achievements, and it's not seen as boastful, and people are really proud of you and they're happy to celebrate with you.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of learning that it's okay to share those achievements.
Yeah. So you and I are actually in a private Facebook group called Lightbulb that is specifically connecting media journalists with dynamic small business owners, people doing interesting stuff in the world. And you had actually put a post out recently that said that you were chosen as one of 100 women for the hashtag I Also campaign with F Entrepreneur. So, I mean, case in point, you put that out there about a month ago or 2 months ago, and I was like, hey, of course, Anna's doing cool things. I need to get Anna on the podcast. So, like, case in point, when you talk about the things you do in the world, opportunities all of a sudden fall into your lap, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Although I have to kind of be completely honest that I hesitated about posting. I hesitated about sharing it with my audience. I think there is a slight kind of, I think when imposter syndrome does show up for you, it is this case of, who am I to get this award? Especially when you're kind of surrounded by perhaps, women and businesses who have, are international and have won various awards over time. It does kind of, you do kind of question, like, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
So it's certainly something that I'm still working on in certain aspects. Of just actually saying, yeah, I've done all of these kind of things, and obviously someone somewhere must have thought that, I deserved the award. So
yeah, I mean, I've been in business for 16 years myself, and I've been through the cycles, and I still do have imposter syndrome even now, even at this stage of running a business. But it's at a different juncture, right? And the best advice I can give anybody that's listening is just do it. Like, just take that bold, courageous step and put the thing out there. And, also remember in the back of your mind that nowadays with social media algorithms, your following is probably only 1% is actually seeing what you're posting. So like, no one is noticing really on a grand scale. Whereas you think, oh my God, I've been posting every single day or every single week. And like, gosh, this is too much. Like, just squash that stinking thinking and just go, you know what? I'm just going to post it. I'm going to post it, and you never know what comes from it.
Yeah, you've got to take action. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
You've got to kind of, because what you do in doing that is you break that cycle of kind of, you stop focusing on that kind of fear factor and actually just take it into action.
And I imagine also, if you get into that comparison trap, you are also falling into potentially a creative rut. So got some tips on how to help people get out of a creative rut?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I think as creatives we go through every now and then, and it's kind of like, the seasons in a year. We go through stages in our business where we're all go and we're excited. We've got lots of creative ideas coming. And then we go through that lull period where we're not entirely sure what we want to do anymore. And it kind of takes a little while for us to get back to into that kind of spring and summer phase of being really kind of excited. Yeah. I think the thing that works for me the best, I think, is actually taking some kind of time out, or which kind of, and it doesn't have to be, a big holiday. It doesn't have to be a big trip away, but just stepping out of that normal routine to give you a little bit of perspective, that can be really, really powerful.
And in that stepping out or taking some time off, do you encourage people to journal, or like, how is it literally just go sit on a beach and be for a bit instead of do?
Well, I think, that certainly has a kind of its place. And I think becoming kind of a bit more grounded and, like you say, just being is sometimes enough. And then our subconscious mind is still working away at the, perhaps the problems or the things that you were trying to solve.
Yeah.
But I think journaling, again, personally for me is a huge tool to overcome those creative ruts and those times where I'm not entirely sure which direction to go in, or perhaps I'm lacking some clarity.
Yeah. Are there any specific questions that you'd ask yourself, or journal prompts, if you will, that help you get more clarity or get closer to, understanding what's going on so that you can pull yourself out when you get off holiday?
Yeah, well, I guess it depends on what the issue is, but I think just kind of trying to understand if you are feeling kind of a bit of resistance, or you're feeling a little bit stuck, where is it coming from? And trying to understand, is it a specific project that's causing that? Is it, perhaps a relationship with a client? What is it that's actually kind of causing you to feel this way? But other than that, I just kind of go off freehand and just try and get as much out on paper, and you'd be surprised how much clarity you can gain from that, and the kind of connecting of dots that happens when you do that.
Yeah, so it sounds like just doing some free writing and giving yourself space to brain dump onto paper, like whatever is swirling in your head. Yeah, I think that's very powerful. I do a lot of journaling myself. And, for me, you might think if you're listening to this, like, oh, well, I think it all out and that's fine. But there is something truly powerful in your brain when it comes from your head swirling around and down onto paper. And then you have perspective. That is the zooming out, if you will, of like going, oh, well, that was swirling. I didn't realize that was underneath all of that. And that helps you to pick it apart bit by bit. So what about if you're thinking about trying something new in your business, or you're thinking about a big pivot? You are a wedding photographer and now you've moved into NLP coaching. Like, what about overcoming your fear there to try something new? Any advice?
I think the biggest advice I can give is to take consistent small steps.
Yeah.
I think we have a tendency to perhaps try and go all out and go big and overwhelm ourselves in the process. Actually, what we can do is just take small steps. So whether that's a new project that you want to be working on, what can you do today to maybe just kind of jot down some ideas as to the research that needs to be done in order to, progress with that.
Yeah.
We don't have to be thinking, what's the kind of end goal and how do I get there? Just taking small steps kind of consistently, I think, is a really good way just to kind of get moving and just to, again, it's kind of taking action, but in a small, consistent way.
I think that's great advice, because a lot of times, again, we don't know what we don't know. Even me at year 16, there's a lot of stuff I don't know. You have a vision, right? You know where you want to go. You know where you are now and what maybe needs to change to get to that point there. All the other steps in between, there's thousands and thousands of different paths to get there. Just taking the very next step, with courage and boldness, and then the next step after that, and then go, gets you slowly there. This kind of sparked something in my mind. I also think that when we compare ourselves to others, especially as women, it comes from a place of like insecurity and fear and not enoughness, right? Or at least it does for me when it happens for me. That if we all, whoever is listening to this episode, we could all take like a Girl Scout honor like pledge and just say, I'm not in competition with that other woman. And like, in fact, we are all working together, doing our own thing in our own lane. And, to do what we can to lift other people up, or also, look forward to see who we can find mentors or coaches that are 3 to 5 years ahead of us as well. Like, wouldn't the dynamic change as womankind if we all just agreed to do that, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I think we have a tendency to forget that actually also the kind of the women we might be looking up to, for example, are like 5 years ahead, 5 years of working out through their own stuff.
Totally.
And so we have a tendency to compare, to people perhaps who are way ahead in their experience, in maybe the kind of whether that's professional experience, whether that's through school, all of that kind of stuff that we just don't take into account when we're comparing on that face level. So, checking in with ourselves in that way and just kind of bringing awareness as to the fact that actually, we all come from different backgrounds and we're all unique in each way, in our own way. And so kind of holding on to that in the sense that we all bring something different. And so focusing on that as opposed to, well, how is this better or worse? It doesn't matter because we're each uniquely different. So
yeah, and the way I translate that in my mind is if you know of a cool networking event that's coming up and you know somebody that would value that, invite them along. Say, hey, Anna, come with me. Let's go to that thing. Or if you know of an opportunity for, say, press, like in the Lightbulb Facebook group that we're in, where you're like, oh my gosh, there's somebody looking for someone to give a quote on an article that's not my area of expertise, but I know it's Anna's, so I'm going to kick her over to that. It's like just being a little bit more outwardly focused instead of so desperately inwardly focused of like scarcity and like, oh, I just got to protect my little piece of pie. I think that changes your mindset, and your ability to see opportunity around you as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I'm really big on in terms of not viewing everyone as competition and trying to just help each other out. And, if I get inquiries and I can't either, I'm not available, I pass them along to someone who's also local and technically competition.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to do that because if I can't do the work, someone else might as well
Yes.
have it, and it helps the client and it helps them as well. So it's a win-win, and I feel like I'm being helpful. And it is like you say, it's this comes from that kind of more abundant place as opposed to the scarcity of, oh no, I'm going to protect my business and I won't give them work because you know.
Energetically, it just feels better. I mean, when I way back in the day was a wedding planner back in Austin, Texas, that's exactly it. So if we had clients or prospects that would come through and either the date was booked or it just wasn't a fit either for price or personality, I had a list of about 5 or 6 competitor wedding planners who I knew were very good at specific types of clients, where that is not my ideal client, but it is certainly yours, that I would be more than happy to refer onwards. And the bump of that is you feel good because you now have not taken a what is potentially a toxic client for you, but a dream client for someone else. You also feel good because you've now spread the love to somebody else, and that is hopefully helping them pay their bills and feed their children and, pay their payroll to their staff and all of that. But what also I found was really interesting in that referral process and really doing it, not just saying it, but like doing it, is that those people came back. They came back, say, 5 years later and said, hey, you know what? I know that you referred me over to them for my wedding, but hey, I work for a corporate client and we're looking to produce a holiday party. Can you help us with that? So I mean, it's just a win-win-win-win-win in my books as well. So homework for anyone listening right now, if you can think of 5 or 6 competitors in your direct market that you could also set up a referral scheme with, who would those people be? Jot their names down right now and, reach out to them. Say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. I was inspired by a podcast I listened to recently. Would you be open to referral, and see what comes of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also goes to kind of just making connections and getting to know people who you perhaps normally would see as competitors. Yeah. I've made friends with plenty of coaches and photographers. Yeah. And those relationships are actually really mutually beneficial because we get to chat about kind of the work that we do, and we get to kind of bounce ideas, and it might be that they've worked out a good way of doing something that you haven't thought of, and it's building connections that are actually going to serve you in many other ways as well.
I love it. Yeah, I 100% agree. And then I think once you start to know who your competitors are on a human level, you go, oh, yeah, you're dealing with the same stress and anxiety or cash flow issues or whatever as I am. And it takes them off of a pedestal in your mind because you've got this image based on their Instagram feed of how perfect and amazing and, lucratively, financially amazing their life is. But it's the truth, you start to see them as humans as well.
Yeah.
So what about being more visible in your brand, showing up either in social media or speaking on stage or, attending face-to-face networking meetings? What advice would you give people there?
Again, it kind of comes back to what I said earlier, but you've got to start somewhere. So I would probably encourage you to start kind of small as opposed to booking yourself in to do a speaking gig if you've never done anything like this before.
Yeah.
But particularly showing up, online, I think people connect with people, and it's such a valuable tool that we have at our disposal that for the most part is free. Obviously, networking events you might, pay a little bit to attend, but it's not a huge kind of investment. And so it's making those connections, those kind of, like you said, kind of human connections with others, and whether that's potential clients or, colleagues in the industry. I think it's hugely beneficial. And so obviously when obviously you mentioned that kind of earlier, when I took my business full time, I realized how lonely actually running your business can be.
Totally is. Yeah.
And so I decided I couldn't quite find a very kind of casual, informal networking event near me. So I decided to start one. And I've been running it for almost 2 years. We're coming up to 2 years soon. And it's been kind of one of the best things I've done in my business, actually, because I don't make any money from it. It's a free event to attend, but the connections and the friendships that I've made with people who really understand what it's like to run a business have been completely invaluable.
Yeah. So I'll put a link in the show notes for everybody. If you want to check out Anna's upcoming networking events and things, just go to the simplifierspodcast.com to find those show notes. Yeah, I think you're right. And I also think that for me, my time is so limited, especially since I've got young kids. I am very strategic about and intentional about what networking events I go to. So I think, and I'm curious if you have the same kind of concept or strategy, I think about, well, A, who's going to attend, and B, am I looking to build deeper relationships with colleagues, competitors, vendors, suppliers? That's one kind of networking event. Or am I going to a networking event to meet prospective clients? And because it's a different way I show up to both of those things. It's still me, but it's just my mindset is very different going into one room versus another. How do you like to strategize what you go to?
Yeah, I think for me, for the most part, it's the event that I run is very much, it is about creating and cultivating those kind of closer relationships, and whether any kind of work comes out of it later on, that's great. But it's more about that kind of having that support, and that support network, like I say, of business owners who understand exactly what you're going through. And then obviously one of the events that we go to is the Blue Stockings event. And that's a really great way of meeting people in completely different industries, but also has that element of actually having a speaker. So I feel like I'm going to kind of perhaps learn a little bit about a topic that perhaps I wasn't familiar with. So things like that I find really kind of interesting. It gives you that kind of best of both worlds as well.
Yeah. And especially as our businesses and the way of businesses are moving into online digital businesses, where we are in our little bubbles, sitting at home, doing what we can, and not talking to anybody besides our cat. Like, it is so important to get back out there and face to face with other like-minded business owners and go, oh yeah, hey, how's it going? Are you struggling with this as well? Or I think education and just having that level set is so incredibly important now more than ever.
Yeah. And as you make that point, I actually recently, because I've been working from home, my previous kind of job before I took the business full time was actually based from home. So I've kind of very used to working from home. However, I think over time you become a little bit stale in that routine, and it can be quite, it is isolating at the end of the day.
It's lonely.
It is. And so I recently started going to a co-working club as well, which is just once a week. And I get lots of work done, but I also have that community feel. It's kind of like, being in an office again.
And I think that there's a balance. So we all, or a lot of us maybe started in corporate and worked in a cubicle farm and had that. And we're like, ugh, I don't want that ever again. And then we went to the exact extreme opposite, where we're working from home, sometimes not showering for days. Like just isolated. It's like, oh, let's get back into the center. Just dip in, dip out. So I want to change gears a little and talk about tapping into your own intuition. What role does that play to help you or your clients avoid comparison?
I think tapping into our intuition allows us to kind of feel grounded, and it allows us to kind of just focus on ourselves, as opposed to looking at all the shiny things and all the shiny projects that everyone else is doing. It actually allows us to kind of bring it in and kind of get in touch with what actually feels good to us. And it's a really good guide in terms of, you know, perhaps where you want to take your business. What are your priorities when you're running a business? Is it to make a 6-figure business because that's what Instagram and all the social media tells you that it is?
Right.
Or perhaps, which there's nothing wrong with it, by the way, but as long as you understand the kind of the motivation behind it, and as long as you are aligned with kind of the reasons for a choice or a project that you're running, and so I think it allows us to kind of get a lot more clarity in what we do.
What about spotting the triggers? Is that a part of it as well? Like when you start to go, oh, I'm not enough, or oh, I'm not doing enough, or oh, I should quit right now. Like, does that help you spot those triggers as well?
Yeah, absolutely, because it does bring a lot more awareness into your daily life. It's kind of like just being mindful of what you are, consuming online. And so it does kind of bring awareness to those triggers. So, for example, like I kind of mentioned earlier, I might have been scrolling for an hour, and then later on down the line, I realized that my mood has changed.
Yeah.
Why is that? And it's the ability to then spot those triggers right there and then, and then from there, you can obviously decide, well, where are we going with this? Am I going to continue looking at this content that potentially is affecting me negatively?
Yeah.
Or am I going to mute it for the time being just to give myself some space? And that's okay. I think we need to recognize that we are kind of protecting ourselves and that that's okay to do.
Yeah.
Are we going to completely unfollow that person perhaps, or whether is it an account, a specific account, or perhaps it's a whole industry that's making you feel a little bit just, not too great. And so it's very much just bringing that awareness to what is it that's triggering you, and how can you take control back, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And, I'll tell you a secret of what I've been doing lately. And by saying this, I'm going to all of a sudden out myself, but it's okay. On Facebook, my personal Facebook page, not my business one, roughly 1,200 contacts or whatever, friends on my personal Facebook page. I have actually gone through and I think muted 80% of them. Is that horrible for me to say? Like, I was finding myself scrolling endlessly to a point where I just couldn't. It was too much information, too much of people's pretty vacation photos in sunny locations while I'm sitting here in rainy, stormy, gross, cold, miserable England weather. You can snooze someone for 30 days. So you actually go into your personal Facebook page. When you see somebody post something, you can click in those 3 dots in the top right, say snooze for 30 days. They don't know that you have done that, but all of a sudden your feed feels a heck of a lot lighter. So just a thought for people, if your personal Facebook page is giving you the comparison trap hives, that's an easy way to quiet the noise a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we are kind of, I think perhaps sometimes forget is that people do put just this highlight reel and these, all the kind of fun and good stuff that happens.
Yeah.
Very rarely do they share something that perhaps hasn't, the more real kind of aspects of life. And so, if it is triggering comparison, then you have to look at ways in which you can manage that for your own sake and for your own well-being. So I certainly do that on Instagram sometimes, particularly if I'm working on something that I feel like I'm being influenced by other people with what I'm doing. I just mute and I feel so much better for it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like, and I hope I don't sound too extreme when I say this, but this is the analogy I take it as. If I'm an alcoholic, I'm not going to hang out with people at the pub, right? Like if that's something I'm really, really, really struggling with to a point where it is detrimental to me to have in my immediate access, either people who drink for fun or alcohol really close to me, right? Then it's a no-brainer. You you close your bubble and you say, no, that's not coming in. The same thing is here. If you are feeling these triggers popping up, you need to filter what you allow into your space, both mentally or physically or spiritually or whatever, And so I think it's not gosh, that sounds like a good idea. It's like, no, this is a must have, because running a business takes a lot of mental power, and you have to be at the top of your game to ride the waves. And if this is a thing that really is affecting you, take action today to stop it and squash it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think that there was certainly an element of guilt coming up for me when I first thought, actually, I think I need to take control of this. But actually, we are just looking after ourselves, and I think that has to be a priority as a business owner, as a human. We have to put ourselves first, so that we can then, like you say, we've got that then the headspace and the kind of creative ideas. We're not constantly just consuming other people's content.
Yeah. So talk to me about inner critic stuff. This is slightly different in my mind than imposter syndrome. First off, how would you define inner critic, and what's working for you to quiet yours down?
I think inner critic is something that we are probably, all of us are familiar with at one point or another. It's this negative voice in our head that perhaps comes up and tells you that you're not good enough, you can't do this, you will never get to, X or Y. And it's this kind of, some people kind of refer to it as a negative Nancy in your head, just kind of this constant negative dialogue that's happening internally.
So how do you squash yours, or how do you help other clients squash theirs?
I've found that actually using ways to feel kind of grounded, and again, kind of going inward as opposed to kind of outward, is actually really helpful, because it allows us to still the mind a little bit. And so things like meditation, things like journaling, and again, it's kind of bringing that awareness to, why am I having those negative thoughts? But mindfulness and meditation have been huge for me, and just kind of accepting things as they come, and not being too judgmental of ourselves.
Yeah. Do you have any recommendations for apps for meditation or YouTube videos? Like, how are you meditating? Are you literally just turning everything off and being quiet for 5 minutes, or?
So I'm in no way an expert, but I currently use the Insight Timer app, and that has, hundreds if not thousands, thousands if not hundreds of thousands of different guided meditations, meditation music, sleep meditation. So if you're struggling with sleep, you can listen to that as well. And so it has a large library of things that you can pick from. And there are certain meditations that help perhaps with anxiety or stress, or helping you to tap into that intuition. There's lots of different things to pick from, and that's something that I use on a regular basis.
That's great. Well, we'll put the link in the show notes for Insight Timer so people can check that out as well. So if you're intrigued by all that Anna is talking about, she is a coach for creative small business owners, not only in Nottingham, but really you can work with anybody worldwide, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing out in the world these days?
Sure. So I work predominantly with women in the kind of creative industries. And really, I help them to overcome self-limiting beliefs that perhaps we hold on to, that sometimes we don't even realize we have until we start our own business. And actually, that's when things start to come up. So we look at ways in which we can kind of navigate through those, to help women to kind of step into their own power and step into their own kind of true self. Because I think it's something that I know a lot of women struggle with.
Yeah, great. Well, we'll put a link in the show notes, but you can also go to annadunleavy.com to check her out, and tell us a little bit about your podcast as well. It's called Fearless Hustle Collective, right?
Yeah, so the podcast has been running for almost coming up to 2 years, I think now. We are in the fourth season, and it's really just a kind of collection of interviews with women who run their own businesses, and it's gathering their kind of stories of how they got to where they are now, and maybe the kind of challenges and the, the challenges that they had to overcome to run their business and constantly. I mean, I think it's like you said, kind of it is a bit of a wave that we have to ride, and so there are ups and downs, and so we kind of talk about those. And it's.
How would you define fearless hustle in your mind?
I think the idea was that it's more of a kind of a motivational, being fearless and putting yourself out there. That's what comes to mind for me in that term.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right. So we'll put those links out there so people can connect with you and hopefully take a listen to your podcast as well. So, Anna, I've got a couple of questions just to wrap up that I like to ask everybody that comes on the podcast. And again, thank you so much for your time today. These are not easy topics, and to open up and share a little bit about your story. I really appreciate your courage and bravery and letting us know, like just literally behind the curtain, here's what's working, here's what's not working, and that's okay. So tell us, what's one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
Yeah, so a book I'm currently reading is called Atomic Habits by James Clear. You are nodding, so I'm assuming you've heard of it. It's really about looking at ways in which we can build healthy, good habits, and looking at ways in which we can break those habits that we no longer kind of want. And it kind of looks at various ways and systems in which we can do that. And I think it's a great book for anyone to read, because we all have various habits. It doesn't have to be about kind of breaking bad habits, but perhaps building new ones that are going to, benefit you and your business.
Yeah, it's a great book. It's a very great recommendation. So we'll put that link in the show notes. Tell us, who's one person in your network, somebody that you know personally, you just feel is up to brilliant things, and we could shine a spotlight on them, and who knows, maybe one day we'll have them on the podcast.
Yeah, so there's a lady called Jo, and she runs the Mad and Sad Club, and she is a mental health at work mentor. And so she really works with people who perhaps are in employment or are self-employed, and looking at setting healthy boundaries around work in order to kind of foster a healthy kind of mental health, I guess.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, she's doing great things with that.
That's amazing. Well, yes, I have not heard about Jo, so I'll definitely want to link her up in the show notes as well. I believe gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. So tell me, what's one thing you're grateful for right now in your life?
I think more than anything, it's the flexibility that my business provides me. And so the flexibility to spend more time with my family, that was very much a motivation when I first started my business, to be able to be around in the school holidays or in the afternoons after school. And so, yeah, that's kind of something that I'm, grateful for every day.
Yeah. So my last question for you is this, and again, thank you so much for your time today. Someone somewhere is listening to this episode right now, and she is right in the thick of it. She is feeling maybe she's on the brink of quitting her business and going out and get a jobby job because she just can't even. She just doesn't think she's got what it takes. She's stuck in the comparison trap. So what's one thing you could whisper into her ear right now just to encourage her in this moment?
I think it would be to focus on yourself and acknowledge the amazing things that you are doing, acknowledge the progress you have made, and actually just trust the process and trust the kind of journey, because business is very much a roller coaster of emotions. And so trust that it is going to be worth it. Wherever you're going, it's going to be great.
Anna, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.